I'm Grace, 30 years old, living in Denver, Colorado. Even now, people still ask why I once considered marrying Ethan Collins, a man whose name alone makes me regret the years I wasted. I met Ethan 5 years ago at a small company party hosted by a close friend. It was pouring rain and there he was, standing under the awning in a wrinkled dress shirt, charming everyone with stories as if they were hearing them for the first time. Ethan had this way of making people feel like they were the most interesting person in the room, even when he was just talking about an old coffee shop by the highway. Back then I thought, this is the man I can trust to hold my hand through every storm. Ethan worked in finance, not flashy or powerful, but carried a quiet confidence. We started dating, and everything felt so steady that I truly believed we'd build a simple, happy family together. A year ago, Ethan proposed during a picnic at Red Rocks. The sapphire ring gleamed under the sunset, and his sweet promises brought me to tears. But I wasn't just saying yes to Ethan, I was also walking into a marriage with the Collins family. His parents, Walter and Nancy Collins, were the kind of people who needed the world to orbit around them. Wealthy, showy, and firmly convinced their opinions were absolute truths. From our very first meeting, I saw Walter's critical gaze sweep over my simple dress and polite introduction. His smile never reached his eyes. Nancy was subtler. Her words were always sugar-coated yet somehow carried a sting. "Oh, you work in marketing. That must be fun." Though of course not quite like finance or law, fields that create real value. I told myself, it's fine, they probably just need time to accept me. But eventually I realized their arrogance wasn't temporary. It was who they were. Every interaction with them was a subtle reminder of their superiority. From choosing expensive restaurants for casual meetings, to endlessly retelling stories of how the prestigious Collins family donated to museums and supported local government projects. Never forgetting to emphasize figures in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ethan usually brushed off their snide remarks. Once, after Nancy asked me for the third time if anyone in my family had attended an Ivy League school, Ethan simply shrugged. That's just how they are. They think they're helping me pick the right person. I laughed along, convincing myself that love would be enough to bridge the gap. But it wasn't that simple. The closer we got to the wedding, the heavier Walter and Nancy's presence became. Family dinners turned into silent examinations. Their suggestions evolved into veiled commands. And Ethan, the man I once believed would be my teammate, chose silence every time, sometimes even siding with his parents. I began to understand I wasn't just marrying Ethan. I was being pushed into a 3-against-1 relationship, where my worth would always be measured and scrutinized. They didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted a trophy of success to parade around their elite circles. And I foolishly once believed love alone could change that. If there's one person who taught me what kindness truly means, it's my mother, Elaine Bennett. She passed away 3 years ago in the fall, after a sudden stroke I'm still learning to accept. But before she left, she lived a life that commanded respect without ever demanding it. Quiet, humble, always helping others in ways that preserved their dignity. The Collins family was no exception. Back when Walter Collins' furniture business was on the verge of collapse, no one in the financial world dared to co-sign a loan for them. Their books were a mess, orders were being canceled, and short-term debts were about to explode into a public scandal. In that moment, it was my mother who quietly co-signed a $350,000, the sum she had saved over 20 years managing a family-owned supermarket chain. I remember exactly what she said as she signed the papers. Helping someone in need isn't about whether they deserve it, it's about whether you can live with yourself if you walk away. But to the Collins family, that help became a debt they had no intention of acknowledging. Even after reviving the company, Walter would tell friends at parties, "Good thing I saw the potential and made the right moves, or else we'd be out of business by now." And not a single word about my mother. Not even a hint of gratitude for the woman who risked everything for their so-called potential. Nancy had her own way of showing appreciation. Every time the topic of saving the company came up, she'd skillfully redirect the credit to our family's strong relationship with the local bank. The way she said it, you'd think the loan existed because of their networking, not because of a woman they never truly respected. I once tried to remind Ethan of all this, hoping, naively, that he'd stand up for me. You know exactly what my mother did for your family, don't you? Ethan stayed silent for a long while before answering. I do, but that was a long time ago, Grace. Bringing it up now won't change anything. Those words, from the man I was supposed to marry, left a wound so sharp it felt cold, to the bone. And it wasn't just the company. The invisible debts my mother carried for the Collins family went far beyond that. When Ethan was 24, after his car accident left him needing reconstructive surgery that insurance refused to cover, it was my mother who paid $40,000 out of her own pocket to spare him a lifetime of pain. She never told anyone. I only found out because I overheard a bank call confirming the transfer. Yet, when Ethan recovered, Walter proudly told his friends how his son had overcome everything through sheer determination. Determination? Or was it my mother's money? I never expected gratitude. But the way they erased every trace of the truth, treating it as if it was nothing but a given, filled me with a quiet, simmering rage. The worst was last year, when Nancy organized a charity auction for the so-called Collins Scholarship Fund. A grand name, though the initial $100,000 came directly from my mother. On one condition: anonymity. Not only did they parade that donation as their own, they even brought in the press, appearing on local TV with speeches that made my stomach turn. Our family has always believed in giving the next generation a chance. A chance? They built their philanthropy on the sweat and sacrifice of someone they never truly respected. Ethan knew the truth. He admitted my mother was the one who funded it. But then he said something I'll never forget. What matters is the result, Grace. Whether her name's on it or not, students still get the scholarships. We don't have to make it a big deal. I looked at him for a long time. This wasn't the same man who once waited patiently for me under that rainy awning. In front of me was someone who had grown too comfortable living in a bubble built by others, never once pausing to say thank you. They forgot one simple truth. Kindness isn't a doormat for people to wipe their feet on and walk away. And I, whether I liked it or not, was slowly realizing that my silence had been enabling their ingratitude to thrive. The cracks in my relationship with Ethan didn't shatter all at once like a storm. They formed slowly, drip by drip, so subtle that I sometimes questioned if I was just being too sensitive. Like that evening, when I mentioned my mother over dinner at Ethan's apartment. I still remember how Mom used to bake apple pies for the whole neighborhood every Thanksgiving. People would wait for that cinnamon smell, I said, my eyes sparkling with nostalgia. Ethan only gave a dry chuckle. Yeah, your mom always loved taking over things no one asked her. I froze. That sentence stung like a slap. But Ethan said it so casually that I didn't even know how to respond. Logic told me to speak up. My heart, foolishly, kept making excuses. Maybe he didn't mean it that way. But those unintentional remarks kept piling up, each like a tiny thorn refusing to dislodge. Nancy never missed a chance to remind me how my background wasn't quite Collins material. That cocktail fundraiser for a private hospital, I wore a simple black dress, the last gift my mother bought me before she passed. Nancy gave me a once-over, smiled sweetly, and said, Oh, such a simple down-to-earth style. I suppose girls from out west prefer it that way. Around here we lean toward a bit more refinement. I'm not someone who blushes easily, but that night my ears burned. Ethan stood right beside me, heard every word, yet only smiled awkwardly as if his mother had commented on the weather. I told myself to brush it off, but when Nancy continued sharing inspirational stories about my humble yet resilient upbringing, like I was some living charity project, Ethan's silence became harder to ignore. I remember one brunch at the veranda where Nancy went on and on about the Collins family legacy. She spoke of her grandfather, a renowned real estate investor, and how she hoped I would gradually learn traditional family values after marrying Ethan. I turned to Ethan, hoping for a glance of solidarity, a small gesture of support. But he only stared into his espresso, as if none of it concerned him. Another time, I suggested having an outdoor wedding in the lavender fields my mother loved. Nancy cut me off immediately. Oh, that sounds cute, but perhaps a bit rustic for the Collins taste. We should opt for a more sophisticated venue, something that aligns with family tradition. And Ethan? He simply agreed. Ethan smiled and added, Mom's right, honey, we should make this wedding truly memorable, not some casual picnic vibe. I swallowed hard. My mother once dreamed of seeing me in a wedding dress, standing in a field of purple flowers. But in front of the man I planned to spend my life with, that dream was brushed aside like a childish fantasy. The closer the wedding approached, the sharper these small signs became. During a guest list meeting, Walter asked bluntly, Grace, I assume your parents don't have many people to invite, right? That's fine, the Collins side will handle most of the guest list. It would be a waste to have a big wedding without some high-profile names. I clenched my hands, replying softly but firmly. My family may be small, but everyone present will truly wish us well. Ethan glanced at me, offering a pacifying smile. Walter's just joking, honey, you're being too sensitive. No, they weren't joking, they were testing my limits bit by bit. When I suggested a small tribute corner at the wedding to honor my mother, Nancy laughed. A wedding is a celebration, dear, let's not make it somber. Young people don't do that anymore. Ethan looked at me and sighed. Mom has a point, you should focus on the present, Grace. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't me being oversensitive. This was how the Collins family treated things they deemed unnecessary. Gratitude, kindness, and memories of my mother. I once believed love could blur these differences. But some differences never fade. Especially when the person beside you never once stood up for you. The only question left was, how long would I stay silent? About 3 weeks before the wedding, Nancy and Walter Collins informed Ethan and me that they had finalized all arrangements for the rehearsal dinner. Not a discussion, not a suggestion, a statement. If you want the wedding to go smoothly, it's best to let us handle this part, Nancy said with a knowing smile. We need to maintain appearances for both families. Both families? I wondered if they ever truly considered mine. The dinner was set at Crescent Bell, a luxurious restaurant in downtown Denver, known for hosting seasoned business executives and politicians. Crystal chandeliers, velvet upholstered chairs, and a menu priced high enough to make any normal person hesitate for a month. When I gently mentioned that my family was more accustomed to warm, simple gatherings, Nancy merely raised an eyebrow. Grace, you're about to become a Collins. It's time you get used to a higher standard. Ethan, as usual, said nothing. I wasn't consulted about the guest list. One evening, when I tried asking about my family's side, Walter waved it off like a trivial matter. Grace, your family probably has just a few close relatives. We had to expand the list to fill the space. Don't worry, we'll make sure it's a perfect evening. Fill the space, as if my side was merely a gap needing to be patched up for appearances. The guest list arrived via email 2 days later. I counted over and over. My family, just my father, Uncle Paul, and Cousin Jenna. The rest, over 90%, were Walter's business partners, Nancy's fundraising circle friends, and a handful of notable figures whose names meant nothing to me. I turned to Ethan, showing him my phone. Are you really okay with our event turning into this? Ethan shrugged. Don't overthink it, Grace. They just want the best for us. We're still the main focus. I gave a soft laugh, but inside I felt empty. The main focus? Then why wasn't even my favorite dish on the menu? I discovered this when Nancy proudly sent over a PDF of the dinner layout with a note. Everything has been carefully curated to reflect the Collins family's refined taste. The menu was an endless display of extravagance: caviar, foie gras, wagyu beef, and a wine list that could buy a decent condo. Not a single dish reflected me or my family. I had hoped to serve a simple grilled chicken salad, my mother's signature dish for special occasions, but Nancy dismissed it outright. Wraith, darling, people come here to experience class, not a backyard picnic dinner. I bit my lip, telling myself once again, now is not the time to stir conflict. That day's meeting felt more like a Collins brand launch than a family gathering. Nancy and Walter directed everything from flower arrangements to invitation fonts, as if this was their company's product showcase, not a rehearsal dinner for two families. Even the seating arrangements were meticulously planned to optimize strategic relationships. My father, a kind-hearted man who had worked as a librarian for over 30 years, was assigned to the farthest table, seated with junior employees from Walter's company. Ethan noticed my pale face as I read the seating chart, but merely squeezed my hand and whispered, "We just need to get through that night, things will be different after." But I wasn't sure that after would ever come. Not when the man beside me always chose silence whenever I was disrespected. What I couldn't forgive was how they deliberately erased every trace of my mother from the event. When I suggested placing a small photo of her at the welcome area, Nancy smiled as if dousing me with cold water. "Oh, Grace, that evening is for celebrating, not for making people feel gloomy. If everyone brought their sadness to the table, who would want to attend?" I wanted to remind her that my mother had saved their family, that without her, they wouldn't even have the status to talk about class today. But I held back. Only this time the bitterness didn't fade as easily. It became clearer than ever, this wasn't a rehearsal dinner for my wedding. It was a Collins Power showcase. And I in their eyes was nothing more than a pretty prop, so long as I stayed where they placed me. But were they so certain I would stay obedient until the very end? That evening, when I stepped into the grand hall of Crescent Bell, the first wave of emotion wasn't excitement or anticipation. It was isolation. The air reeked of expensive wine, mingling with the artificial charm layered over every greeting and handshake. Crystal lights reflected off dazzling gowns, but nothing in that room felt like it belonged to me. I glanced around, searching for familiar faces. My father, Richard, stood quietly by a side table. Uncle Paul and my cousin Jenna had just arrived, huddled together as if afraid to disturb this glamorous world. Just 4 people from my side. The rest was a sea of strangers. Business moguls, politicians, Walter's old drinking buddies, and Nancy's golf club acquaintances. Ethan walked beside me, hands in his pockets, looking as relaxed as if this were his personal triumph. "You doing okay?" he asked without even meeting my eyes. I gave a faint smile, a smile I'd perfected over these past months, a smile reserved for the Collins family. As we moved toward the center of the hall, Nancy appeared, greeting me with a half-hearted hug. "Grace, you look beautiful. The dress is simple, but it suits your style." Her eyes scanned me up and down, the smile failing to mask her judgment. Walter, as expected, didn't bother with pretense. He clapped Ethan on the shoulder, then turned to me with a look I knew all too well. The gaze of someone bestowing their light upon a lesser being. "Ethan's a lucky man, Grace, a girl who knows her place, and patient too. Not everyone can handle the reality of the Collins family." Walter's booming laughter prompted polite chuckles from nearby guests. I swallowed hard, fingers tightening around my clutch. Their comments were no longer veiled insults. They were openly telling me that I was merely a chosen one. Lucky, but never equal. "Ethan?" He simply chuckled, turning to toast one of Walter's longtime partners as if he hadn't heard a thing. That night, I realized I wasn't a bride-to-be. I was a well-packaged display item, just refined enough for their showcase. Every introduction, every handshake orchestrated by Nancy and Walter revolved around how generous they were for accepting me. Grace is humble from a hard-working family. We feel it's our responsibility to guide her into more refined circles. I stood there, smiling as I listened to myself being reduced to someone in need of guidance. With each comment, I imagined my mother, Elaine, squeezing my hand, reminding me of what truly mattered. Across the room, I caught my father's gaze. He said nothing, but the subtle grip of his hand on the table spoke volumes. Ethan floated from group to group on the Collins side, laughing, toasting, fully immersed in his element. Every time I tried to join a conversation, I was gently edged out with lines like, "Oh, Grace might not be familiar with this topic yet. We're discussing complex venture investments." They made me feel small, not because I lacked worth, but because they deliberately built a stage where I'd never be allowed to stand as an equal. The night wasn't even halfway through, yet I'd already counted no less than 5 times Nancy had casually remarked how fortunate I was to be marrying into the Collins family. Not cherished, not respected, just lucky. Ethan remained by their side, nodding and smiling at every condescending comment, as if it were all perfectly acceptable. I understood then, more than ever, if this wedding happened, my place in the Collins family would always be the same, an outsider who should feel grateful to be included. I clenched my fists tighter, telling myself that tonight might be the last time they'd get to belittle me so easily. The only question left was when I would push back. And how. As the soft clinking of a knife against a wine glass echoed through the room, the crowd fell silent as if someone had hit the mute button. The lights dimmed, leaving a warm, golden glow over the small stage ahead. Walter Collins rose slowly, adjusting his deep burgundy silk tie. His smile was laced with unfiltered smugness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walter began, his voice calm and poised as though addressing shareholders. "Tonight is a special occasion. We are not only celebrating my son Ethan but also welcoming Grace, a lovely young lady from a modest, gentle hometown, into the esteemed Collins family." I gripped the edge of the table, feeling every pounding beat of my heart. Our family has always believed that marriage is a union of values. Ethan is a perfectionist. He needs a wife who knows how to listen, who can balance ambition and reality. Walter paused, glancing at me as if to emphasize each word. "Fortunately, Grace seems like the right choice." Scattered, awkward laughter rippled through the room. I felt the chairs around me grow suffocatingly close, unbearably heavy. But Walter wasn't finished. "And of course, we must mention Mrs. Elaine Bennett, Grace's mother, a woman of remarkable enthusiasm." He stressed the word enthusiasm like it was a flaw. "She once helped our family during a difficult time. To be fair, she had a persistent kindness, sometimes to the point of making people uncomfortable." I heard a sharp, mocking laugh from the main table. "Nancy." Elaine was always present, always ready with advice, even when it wasn't exactly requested, Nancy added, her lips curling with satisfaction. But, to be honest, without her, the Collins company would have had a much more interesting journey. Walter chuckled as if his wife had delivered the punchline of the evening. "We are, of course, very grateful, though sometimes that kindness came with a bit too much initiative. But that's her charm, isn't it?" Polite, dry laughter echoed across the room. I felt the entire world tilt toward them, eager to join in this public shaming of my mother. Ethan sat right beside me. He said nothing, didn't even look at me. He simply twirled his wineglass, as if waiting for his cue in this performance. I turned to him, whispering, barely able to keep my composure. "You're really gonna let them talk about my mother like this?" Ethan sighed, eyes fixed on the table. "Grace, they're just joking, don't take it so seriously." I heard something crack inside me. Nancy continued. "Anyway, thanks to Elaine, we're all able to be here today. And now we're taking in a daughter who inherited her mother's admirable work ethic. We certainly hope Grace will maintain that humility as she becomes a Collins." Taking in? Humility? They were twisting my mother's kindness into a joke, turning it into some grand favor the Collins family was now bestowing upon me. I felt my father's gaze from the last table. He sat upright, his face rigid, but his eyes were red. Uncle Paul's hand gripped the chair's armrest, while Jenna sat with her head down, fists clenched in her lap. None of them deserved to hear this. Walter raised his glass. "So, let's all raise a toast to this delightful union. The Collins family eagerly welcomes Grace, and we're confident we'll help her become the very best version of herself." This time the laughter was louder, longer. It felt like the final twist of a knife into my pride. I looked at Ethan. He gave a faint smile, clinking his glass on cue. There was not a hint of recognition for what I was going through. In that moment, I knew. I was sitting in a room full of people who had no qualms trampling over my mother's values. And Ethan, the man who once promised to protect me, stood firmly on their side. To them, I was just a small-town girl lucky enough to be chosen to polish the Collins name. But luck does not mean silence. Faced with such humiliation, I refused to stay quiet. I don't remember exactly when I stood up. I only know the chair behind me scraped loudly against the floor, shrieking through the room filled with their fake laughter. All heads turned toward me. Eyes wide with surprise, confusion, and that thin layer of smugness from people who always believed someone like me would never dare raise her head. But I did not bow. I looked straight at Walter and Nancy, not with the deferential gaze of the Grace who once kept silent for the sake of peace. "Mr. and Mrs. Collins," I began, my voice not loud but each word sharp and deliberate enough to hold the entire room's breath. I believe it's time we revisit a few truths your family has conveniently chosen to forget. Walter leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking. Nancy's frozen smile twitched, her eyes flickering with unease. The Collins company you so proudly boast about today? Who was it that co-signed when the bank turned its back? Who put her own home up as collateral to save the so-called Collins family legacy you love to praise? I paused, my gaze sweeping across the room. That was my mother. Elaine Bennett. She never asked for recognition, never demanded credit, and certainly never expected to be labeled as overly enthusiastic. My mother acted out of kindness. And clearly that concept is far beyond this family's comprehension. I saw Nancy shift slightly, lips pressed into a thin line, but she couldn't interrupt. When Ethan had his car accident and needed surgery that insurance wouldn't cover, who quietly paid the bill? I turned to Ethan, my tone softer but laced with steel. It was my mother. She never brought it up, never sought applause, yet tonight the very people who once reached out for her help are turning her into a joke. Ethan lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly under the table. I waited for him to deny it, to react, but his silence spoke louder than shame. And the so-called prestigious Collins Scholarship Fund, the one you parade around as a beacon of your generosity, the seed money came from my mother. She asked me to keep it quiet because she believed good deeds need no spotlight. I gave a bitter smile. Turns out she was right. Because in the hands of people like you, even gratitude becomes cheap bragging rights. No one dared to laugh now. I've kept quiet for too long. I thought that for Ethan's sake, I could overlook the Collins family's arrogance and hypocrisy, but tonight, watching you use my mother's kindness as the punchline of your dinner show, I realize how wrong I was. Walter cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Grace, we meant no offense, it was just light-hearted teasing among family. I cut him off before he could spin it further. Teasing doesn't mean demeaning others. Jokes don't justify insulting the values of the person who once saved you. And if you think I'll stay silent any longer, you are gravely mistaken. I turned to Ethan, still frozen in place. Ethan, you may be fine with letting them tarnish my mother's name, with watching the woman you claim to love be diminished in front of everyone, but I am not. A heavy silence fell. I took a deep breath, each word slicing through the air. As of this moment, I am officially calling off my engagement to Ethan Collins. The only sound was a wineglass shattering against the floor. Nancy's face went pale. Walter sat bolt upright. Ethan looked up, his lips moving, yet no words came out. I scanned the room, my gaze unwavering. My family doesn't need to be uplifted. I don't need to be grateful for being chosen. The values my mother passed down to me aren't found in crystal glasses or hollow stories about prestige. And I am proud of that. I turned and walked out of the banquet hall amidst a sea of stunned faces. No one stopped me. No one even dared call my name. As the heavy glass doors closed behind me, I realized I had never felt this light before. I wasn't just walking out of that dinner. I was walking away from a life I never belonged to. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. 47 messages from Ethan. 16 missed calls from Nancy. Even Walter graciously sent me a 3-page email starting with, "Don't let a moment of emotion destroy the future you've always wanted." I didn't read it all. I knew exactly what they'd say. Excuses, justifications, pleas, even blame. All orbiting around one belief. They still thought I'd obediently come back. What they didn't understand was that last night wasn't a moment of impulse. It was my final line. By noon, Ethan showed up at my apartment door. He looked disheveled but still clung to his perfectly tailored suit. "Grace, open the door, we need to talk." His voice was warm, smooth, as if nothing had happened the night before. I didn't answer. Not out of hatred, but because there was nothing left to say to someone who could only stay silent when I was being humiliated. Around 3 in the afternoon, a message from my cousin Jenna popped up. "Grace, can you check Aunt Elaine's keepsake box? Something feels off." My heart sank. My mother's keepsake box. The oakwood box she left me before she passed, where I kept my most precious things, Handwritten letters, her embroidered handkerchief, and especially the silver locket engraved with her name, passed down through 3 generations of Bennett women. I rushed to my bedroom, flung open the closet and pulled out the keepsake box. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. The locket was gone. I couldn't believe my eyes. A cold chill ran down my spine. I tore through every layer of tissue paper, checked every drawer, every corner. Nothing. Completely gone. Only one person had entered my apartment after last night's dinner, Ethan, when he had so politely come by to return the engagement ring. I remembered clearly after I refused the ring, Ethan asked to use the restroom. His face had been disturbingly calm. Looking back now, I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. I texted Ethan, "Where is my mother's silver locket?" His reply came 15 minutes later, so short it knocked the air from my lungs. "I just borrowed it. Wanted to keep a little piece of you." Borrowed? A keepsake? I gripped my phone tightly, a flood of anger and disgust surging up all at once. Among all the despicable things, Ethan's audacity to steal my mother's most sacred memento and disguise it as sentimentality surpassed even Walter and Nancy's shamelessness. I called Ethan immediately. He picked up after 2 rings. "Grace, I know you're angry, but I really just wanted something to feel connected to you. Please, don't misunderstand." His voice was soft, gentle, as if he were the victim. "You stole from my mother. Don't you dare turn this into some cheap emotional story." I cut him off, each word hitting like a hammer. "I didn't steal. I just borrowed it and I was going to return it," Ethan faltered. "Return it? Just like how your family has been returning my mother's kindness all these years?" I couldn't stop the bitter laugh. Silence. Ethan knew there was no excuse. "Where is the locket?" My grip on the phone tightened, my heart growing colder with every beat. "At my house. I left it in my parents' study. I swear I had no bad intentions." His voice trailed off. Even he seemed ashamed of his own justification. "Keep that promise to yourself, Ethan. I'll come get it, and that will be the last time you ever mention my family again." I hung up, not giving him a chance to explain. Less than 30 minutes later, I stood at the gates of the Collins estate. The heavy black iron loomed as imposing as ever, a monument to a family unaccustomed to being refused. But today, I wasn't here to nod politely or save anyone's face. As I rang the bell, the door opened quickly, revealing Nancy Collins with her usual polished but icy smile. "Grace," she greeted, voice syrupy sweet. "I suppose you're here to clear the air after last night's emotional evening?" I didn't smile, didn't dance around. "I'm here to take back my mother's locket, the one Ethan took from my home without asking." The surprise on Nancy's face lasted only a second before she regained her composure. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, dear. Ethan can be quite sentimental with keepsakes." "I no longer care about his sentiments," I said, voice sharp and unwavering. "That locket belongs to my mother, and I want it back, now." She opened the door wider, her smile fading. "Come in then, let's not put on a show at the front gate." I stepped into the Collins' gleaming foyer. Today, the opulence didn't feel intimidating. It was just a thick coat of gloss masking a hollow core. Nancy led me to Walter's study, the very room where they once lectured me about family values, while I was expected to sit and nod along. The small silver locket lay silently on the desk, surrounded by stacks of files and expensive trinkets, a piece of memory lost amidst a world of shallow grandeur. I walked over, picked it up, feeling the cold metal seep into my palm as I clenched it tight. Ethan appeared in the doorway. He looked more disheveled than usual, shirt wrinkled, eyes avoiding mine. "Grace," he began, "I know you're upset, but I just wanted to hold on to something. To remember you and your mom." "You are not worthy of mentioning my mother," I cut him off, each word razor sharp. "You stood there letting them humiliate her in front of me, in front of my family, and now you dare steal her keepsake and excuse it as a memory?" Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze shuddering. Walter appeared behind him, his expression one of irritation, as if my presence was defiling his pristine home. "Grace, you're blowing this out of proportion. It's just a small item, no need to make such a fuss." I turned, locking eyes with Walter and Nancy. That's right. To you it's just a small item, but to me, to my mother, it holds a lifetime of memories, a symbol of kindness your family has never truly respected. I took a deep breath, each word echoing in the silent room. You've lived so long, wrapped in the pretty facade of money and pride, you actually believe everything can be dismissed as long as you flash enough diamonds on your wrists. Walter's face flushed as he stepped forward. You're standing in our home, young lady. Watch your tone. Thank you for the reminder. But this will be the last time I ever have to set foot here. I gripped the locket tightly, my gaze sweeping over all three of them. I came to retrieve what belongs to my mother. And now I'm leaving. Everything else between us ends here. Ethan reached out, as if trying to grasp something already shattered. Grace, please. I stepped back, shaking my head. Ethan, you had your chance. You had countless moments to stand by me, to defend my mother, but you chose silence, and silence is complicity. I paused, meeting his eyes. I don't need a husband who's complicit in the disrespect of my family. No one said another word as I turned and walked out of that mansion. No more forced smiles, no more syrupy insults. Only the sound of my heels striking the marble floor echoed through the hall, heavy and sharp. Yet somehow my heart felt lighter with every step. When the Collins gates closed behind me, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed an heirloom. I had reclaimed my dignity. And above all, I had restored the respect my mother so rightfully deserved. From that moment on, every tie between me and the Collins name was severed. Permanently. That day, as I returned to my small apartment, the late afternoon sunlight filtered softly through the window, casting a strange sense of calm over everything. I placed my mother's silver locket on the table, my chest still rising and falling. But no longer from anger. What I had regained was not just a piece of old silver, but a reminder of the self-respect and kindness my mother had spent her life teaching me. My phone continued to vibrate with missed calls and messages. Ethan, Nancy, even so-called friends who once whispered, "Grace is so lucky to marry into the Collins family." I didn't read them, didn't open a single one. I didn't need to hear their excuses anymore. They would say I was too emotional, that I ruined a relationship out of pride. But people like them would never understand. When a relationship is built on condescension and lies, they're the ones who destroyed it long before I ever spoke up. The next day, I went with my father and cousin Jenna to the lavender fields my mother had loved. No wedding flowers, no grand stages, just endless purple skies, and the soft, familiar scent lingering in the breeze. I put my mother's locket back around my neck, gently tracing her engraved name, Elaine, feeling its quiet warmth seep into my skin. Somewhere, I knew she was smiling, the way she always did whenever I stood up for what was right. "I made the right choice, Mom," I whispered, letting the wind carry my words far away. I used to fear leaving Ethan. I thought walking away from a 6-year relationship would be too heavy, too painful. But now I realized, the greatest pain isn't losing a man. The real pain is losing yourself just to stay with him. I was no longer the Grace who smiled through gritted teeth at backhanded compliments. No longer the girl who shrank into the corners of the Collins mansion, waiting for a sliver of approval from people who never valued her. I had lived quietly, kindly, and proudly in a world that mistook volume for virtue. In the days that followed, I learned a simple truth. One that only pain could teach. True love never asks you to sacrifice your dignity. Never. Ethan once told me, "This is just how my family is. You'll have to accept it." But I wasn't born to accept being belittled. I don't need to prove my mother's worth to people who see kindness as weakness and humility as inferiority. We all have the right to choose where we belong. And I chose to stand with the values my mother passed down to me. Gradually, the calls stopped. The messages faded. The Collins family, with all their arrogance, would soon find another Grace to fit their glamorous facade. But that was no longer my story. I didn't need a lavish wedding to affirm my worth. I didn't need a man beside me just to fill a picture-perfect image of marital success. What I needed was peace. And for the first time in years, I felt it, completely. That evening, I sat on the old wooden bench my mother loved, amidst the lavender fields, bathed in honey-gold sunset light. No whispers, no judging stares. Just me. And freedom. I smiled. Not a victorious smile of having defeated anyone, but the quiet smile of someone who finally stood up for what she believed in. Mom, today I lived exactly the way you wanted me to. Not because I'd defeated anyone, but because I didn't let them make me forget who I am. Grace's story is not just a wake-up call about the deceit behind glamorous relationships, but a profound lesson in self-respect and family values. In a world obsessed with appearances, having the courage to stand up for what's right, and to say no to disrespect is never easy. But it is those very choices that define our character and honor the legacy of those who taught us to be kind. Sometimes, walking away isn't a defeat. It's the strongest way to hold on to yourself. What do you think of Grace's choice and how she defended her family's values? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories about life, family, and lessons worth reflecting on.